Let's dive into this conversation because I know we've got more than enough to talk about tonight. This is the type of shit that I love to geek out on.
Mhm.
I guess to set the table a little bit, about 10 years ago, everyone in my field of counseling and sexuality, got really excited about a book called Sex at Dawn by Dr. Christopher Ryan that used biology and anthropology and archaeology and paleontology and all of these different fields to paint like a really radical picture of what human sexuality may have looked like before the cognitive revolution and before we started like writing all of this shit down.
Mhm.
And I fell in love with so many of the ideas in that book, and in the time since, a lot of people have really like turned on that book for being really speculative, for making a lot of assumptions beyond what the evidence can show us. So before we get any further tonight, can you talk to us just a little bit about how bioanthropology actually works and what it maybe
Yeah.
can and can't do?
Sure. So I haven't read that book in particular, so I'm not going to
Sure.
speak to that one. But I will say that bioanthropology is the science of humans. It's understanding humans from a biological perspective. So it's studying our anatomy and physiology. It's studying our evolution. It's studying our behaviors. Everything about what it means to be a human being for the past, however many million years you want to go back and draw the line. And so that's what bioanthropology is all about. But anthropology as a whole, the whole field of studying humans, also encompasses cultural anthropology and linguistics and talking about the way that we have behaved presently and also throughout history. And that ties into archaeology, digging up old people and looking up, what were they doing and what can they tell us about our past and our present. There's this whole concept of middle range theory, of trying to draw analogies between the past and the present and the past to understand it. And so all of these different subfields of anthropology are intrinsically tied together. They, like I said before, they tell us what it means to be human. And what it can do is give us a tremendous amount of insight into how to be a human better. It helps us to eradicate ethnocentrism, and it
Mm.
helps us to kind of take ourselves down off of the pedestal a little bit, biologically speaking, and see ourselves for the animals that we are. What it can't do, and what a lot of people are surprised that it can, is that you don't get to just open the book of humans and be like, oh, and this they used to do it this way. Here you see this culture had these pots, and this pot was broken over here, and that means they must have not liked that pot very much, and that tells us now about this part of their culture. There's a huge amount of interpretation, um, and it gets criticized sometimes because it sounds a little bit like fantastical storytelling, that you're going to look back at these bones and pot shards and stone tools and whatever else and put together not only the habits but the whole cultural belief systems of these people. But it's no difference in any other science. You're just putting the facts that you have in order. And so when we go back and look at the fossil record of humanity, so to speak, uh, we find not only this cavalcade of incredible worldviews, we also see our own worldviews as researchers
Hmm.
being put onto that data, and we see problems come out of that. And so like now, especially over the past, I want to say like probably 20 years in anthropology, uh, people have been going back and noticing like, hey, these puritanical Victorian dudes
Yeah.
doing this early research maybe didn't have the best interpretation, and also maybe covered some stuff up that they weren't supposed to. The fact that feminist theory, the idea that women have been around for all of history and did things, that's a very recent development, surprisingly recent. So yeah, that's what it can and can't do, is that it can and can't tell us, it can tell us a lot about who we are, but it's not a magic spell. You know what I mean? It can't just give us the everything we need to know. It still requires us to do science, to do experimentation, to try to understand who we are on a deeper level than just what we can see on the surface.
Yeah, one of the most interesting classes I ever took in university was comparative psychology. And in the very first opening lecture, the professor explained that basically comparative psychology doesn't work. Like the notion of trying to study animals in order to understand humans is sort of based on a flawed assumption. And I know we're going to get into it a little bit tonight, but it is such a tempting idea to be able to say, like, well, these apes do this and those apes do that, and therefore humans must
Yep.
whatever. So I guess from that perspective and with all of those caveats, how unique are humans really? I mean, when you look at us compared to other primates and then compare those primates to one another, how much do we stand out? I mean, obviously we're doing something different. We've got satellites and bikinis and frozen food and all kinds of crazy shit.
Those are all great things.
Oh, good,
Those are
good
all
things.
yeah. So it's yeah. So you're right. When we look at like comparative anatomy or something like that, that's a hugely useful tool for understanding things like paleontology. But comparative psychology, when you're looking at this stuff, like yeah, there are some lines you can draw, and there are some things we can see that definitely aren't uniquely human, like compassion and empathy, and all these different things we think are so much just us are definitely out there in the animal kingdom. But there are a lot of things that make us unique. Not all of them are particularly within the scope of this show, but like they're out there. For example, control of fire. That's a human thing. And
Mm,
when I say human, I should point out that like the term human applies to anything in the genus Homo. So anything for the past 2.6 million years in our lineage would be a human. So you have Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo nadeli, Homo naledi, pardon me, Homo habilis. All of these things are different species of humans. So sustained control the use of fire, that's a human thing. Building boats, that's been around for a million or so years. That's a human thing. Language is a human thing. The kind of tool use that we talk about when we talk about humans is very, because like other apes and some other monkeys, they'll like use stones to crack nuts. Chimpanzees use little balls of moss to soak up water to drink water easily, or they use a twig to fish for termites. That is tool use, but it's not nearly to the level of like what an late Australopithecine or early Homo would be doing to crack stones together. Um, and so, like, yeah, there's a lot of things that make us unique. Behaviorally, that's all of those. Also, morphometrically, we could talk about like we have a reduced canine and no diasterna. That's a cool thing that we've got going on. We've got a highway bone. That's a cool thing we've got going on. The way that we give birth, the way that we are bipedal and constantly, the way that we walk, the muscle attachments or the muscles that develop because of that. Penis bones is one that we're going to talk about a lot.
mhm.
That's a unique one for us. We don't have one of those. So like there's a huge amount of things that separate us. But really what's more interesting to me is that when we look at like all the things that you want to talk about today about sex, we tend to fall weirdly in the middle,
Mm.
and we're strange outliers in all the weirdest, most nonsensical ways. So
So
just
that
we're
roadmap for
bizarre.
understanding ourselves is pretty murky.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and that's the thing when we talk about human evolution. One of the biggest frustrations that people have when they're learning about it is that it's not nearly as cut and dry as we like to pretend. You see that
Mm.
Zallinger diagram with the monkey that levels up and turns into a human
Yeah,
over
yeah.
like 5 years,
Well, why
and
are
that's
there
kind of
still
focused.
monkeys, Forrest?
Right, exactly, and that's the kind of questions that shit breeds, because you see that and you're like, oh well, that's easy. It was this, and then it was this, and it was this, and no, it's this tangled, crazy bush of things, and it's different species popping in and out, and we're not entirely 100% sure which one preceded the other one exactly, and maybe these two were kind of interbreeding, and we didn't think they were, but it looks like they are. And like, it's way more soupy and weird than what it's supposed to be in our heads, and our sexuality and sexual behaviors and sexual phenotypes are all very much the same thing. Our morphological characteristics, our behavioral characteristics regarding sex are fucking strange, man. I love it.